majority of movies I grew up watching don't hold up very well. It's just a universal truth about getting older. Revisiting the movies you once loved as a kid and realizing they're not very good happens to the best of us. There are exceptions though, and Aardman Animations is one of them. I really hope all of you know what Aardman is.
Someone arsing around!
You know, the studio behind Wallace and Gromit, Shaun the Sheep, Chicken Run, Morph, all classics in my book. And for a while they were actually partnered with DreamWorks Animation, which gave us a trilogy of bangers, and they could have kept going, but unfortunately that didn't happen, as following the release of Flushed Away in 2006, DreamWorks and Aardman split ways over creative differences, and as dumb as that may sound, it kind of made sense, at least from a business perspective. You see, when DreamWorks released their own movies, specifically the 3D animated ones, they often attracted more people to the cinema than any of Aardman's works, while the latter produced movies that were generally more consistent through positive critical reception. And even when they did go fully CG with Flushed Away, they barely managed to make back their eye-watering budget of $149 million. And in case you're wondering what a Flushed Away is, don't worry, I got you covered. Flushed Away is a movie about a spoiled British rat named Roddy who gets flushed away from his home into the sewer. Not long after, he teams up with another rat named Rita, who reluctantly agrees to return him to Kensington while trying to evade the Toad and his henchmen. These days, not many people really talk about Flushed Away. Well, not as much as Shrek, I suppose. There is a small dedicated following surrounding the film, but I'm a little too afraid to touch on it. But that's not going to stop me anyway, because today, I want to talk about Flushed Away and why I love it very much. And in case you couldn't already tell, this movie's kind of special to me. And I know that sounds weird, but bear with me, alright? England in the finals? We're off to a good start. Yeah, this movie's set in the UK, like most of Aardman's works, and that means we get to hear Hugh Jackman's rather impressive imitation.
I'm afraid it's time for you to leave.
And yes, that is the Hugh Jackman that you are seeing. Also, you may notice that something's clearly up with this movie, and that's because it's not animated in stop motion, like a lot of other Aardman productions. I'm not going to delve too deep into that just yet, however, so we'll leave it for now. But first off, I want to talk about my man Roddy, or more specifically, how we're introduced to him, just immediately poking his nose out of the cage and busting through the gate as he realizes the house is empty. In this way, we're able to see how exactly Roddy lives his life, and it's kind of funny because we see how much of a loner he is, considering these dolls are the only things that he actually interacts with, despite the fact they're not sentient at all. He doesn't seem to be bothered by it actually, and it's pretty funny, but also very sad. It really shows how despite living a spoiled lifestyle, he's too privileged to realize that actually, living a luxurious life, completely isolated from the world, may only take you so far, which is something he comes to realize later on. Also, this sequence contains a lot of references in the background, plenty of nods to both DreamWorks and Aardman media, and you have to be fast too. They're very easy to miss if you're not paying attention.
Have you got a TV?
We then meet Sid, who's the total opposite of Roddy. He's a lot more loud and less hygienic, and he also makes for a decent contrast to Roddy, as it's shown that while Sid may be gross, rude and a little invasive, he's not really much of a loner.
I'm in the pub. Next thing you know, it's a burst, Walter Main.
And eventually, he just flushes him down the toilet after Roddy's plan to get rid of him backfires, and is suddenly flushed away into an underground world inhabited entirely by rats. We'll get to that part soon. Overall, I think this is a pretty solid opening. It's quick and straight to the point, introducing the main character and setting in just under 10 minutes, immediately getting started with at least an hour left to do everything it needs. Sure, you could argue that it's too fast for us to really care about Roddy, which would be a fair point to make actually. It goes so quick that it's a bit difficult to care for him. You end up feeling more sorry for Rita because one minute she has the answer to her family's prayers, and then suddenly this guy from nowhere fucks up everything, and not only prolongs her struggle, but also puts her into even greater danger. But on the other hand, he eventually does come to realize that yeah, he's a bit of an idiot. Originally though, Roddy was going to be accompanied by these two servants, and you can actually see them in some of the trailers and promotional material. Hell, even the video game featured them. So what happened? Well, according to the directors Sam Fell and David Bowers, they felt it would be better better if Roddy didn't have personal butlers in order to properly demonstrate his overall loneliness. Some of the scenes featuring these butlers were also completely changed for the final cut. For example, when they meet Sid, the kitchen is shown to be fully lit, but in the final version, the entire room is dark. There have been speculation surrounding a bootleg copy of the film containing an earlier version featuring the two butlers, but I don't really know if that's actually true, and if it is, we're probably not going to find it anytime soon. On the surface, Flushed Away may seem like your average Aardman production, with their signature clay models and stop motion, but in reality, not a single frame of the film was made using actual clay, with the team opting instead for computer animation that almost perfectly imitates the iconic plasticine look that the studio is known for. The main reason behind this decision is a fairly obvious one. Take a glance at almost any of the promotional material available. You'll find that there is a common theme linking all of these together. Have you noticed? It's fucking water. Hell, even the logo tells you that. Simply put, the movie features a ton of water, and not only would it have been very expensive to incorporate the CGI water on its own, but it also would have been far easier to damage the plasticine models if real water was used. And while the faithfulness is certainly impressive, the animation quality itself isn't that great. I don't know, for 2006, I just have a feeling this could have looked better, especially with that kind of budget. I do, however, appreciate the direction they took with this new animation technique. Because the film was animated in CGI, it allowed Aardman to really play and experiment with this new tool of theirs. It may also explain the increased use of slapstick, as well as some action set pieces that would have been extremely difficult to pull off in stop motion. As for the setting, I'd say it's one of the film's best attributes. The concept of an entire underground world built by rats is a very cool idea, and they certainly hook you in through its various quirks and unique functions. They even have their own version of London, except it isn't called London. Its name is actually Ratropolis. The most common type of transport here are boats, and I think that's pretty cool. Also, have you seen the way they use household items? Because it's actually so alluring how they put common items like mobile phones, pencils, and toilet rolls to various uses. And if we're running on the assumption that these were all somehow flushed down from up top, that would mean these items are getting found and repurposed into whatever they see fit. This shouldn't take long to explain. After all, you've probably already seen several examples of this movie's approach to comedy, at least in my worthless opinion. Firstly, I gotta point out the obvious. This movie does have a tendency to make a lot of reference jokes, and that may be a huge turn-off for those who aren't interested in those sorts of jokes. But regardless, I think they're pretty funny.
Have you seen my dad?
It's also worth noting that while it does rely on referential humor quite a bit, it's not the only thing they have to offer in terms of comedy. There are also a variety of just silly gags planted throughout the film. These include literal humor,
Target at 12 o'clock.
stupid puns,
Smashing.
football,
England is winning. Anything's possible.
the French,
To action. We surrender.
and of course, toilet humor. You can't have a movie called Flushed Away without some toilet humor.
Careful, mate. Those aren't chocolate buttons.
It's actually surprising the amount of toilet jokes that are present here, that being a lot less than I expected. I mean, it would have been much easier to include said jokes into the film, and it would have made sense knowing the premise, though I do commend them for actually choosing to go with a variety of different jokes rather than just sticking to one type. Spike and Whitey are probably the funniest characters in the film, and I think mentioning them here would further prove my point. Whitey and Spike are nothing more than the typical goofy henchmen who are absolutely incompetent at their job. They obviously work for the Toad, and most of the time when we do see them, they're usually failing to properly perform and complete numerous objectives. Part of what makes them work, however, is their dynamic. Spike is the short wannabe leader who acts more tough than he actually is. He might also qualify for the butt monkey trope you see in a lot of other media, but unlike those, I'd say Spike is one of the few that I can actually 100% get behind. I'm not getting into the details of why I feel that way, but in Flushed Away, I like how it's done, simply because Spike tries so hard to act all tough and macho that he ends up making an utter fool out of himself every single time. And Whitey is just some big chill guy who probably isn't even built for the job. He's not exactly tough or threatening, and is often pulled into all sorts of shenanigans thanks to Spike. And the funniest thing is that he never complains. He just goes with it.
Bingo. Scrabble.
But as you'd expect, not every joke is a winner. In fact, some of the jokes are kinda lame. You already know where I'm going with this. The slugs are easily the most pointless addition to the film. Not only could you take them out of the story, only for nothing to change, but they're also not as funny as the movie wants you to think. I do, however, like some of the music videos featured in the DVD. I thought those were fun, but other than that, they're kind of lame. As much as I'm not a fan of the whole enemies to lovers trope, I think it's decently well done here, if enemies to lovers is what you'd even describe them. I don't know, were they even confirmed as a couple? Because now that I think of it, I'm not really sure. There's only one or two scenes that may or may not allude to this if I remember correctly. Anyways, Rita initially is pretty justified in hating Roddy when they first meet for a number of reasons. 1, he gives away her location. 2, he snitches on her. 3, he smashes up her ruby, even though it was a fake. And 4,
That wasn't on the list.
whatever that was. The gradual development of their relationship throughout the story is pretty good, I'd say. Fairly standard, but not bad at all. It's really fun watching them interact as their goals and personalities clash, though they do eventually find common ground, as you'd obviously expect. If you look at it from a certain angle, Rita serves as the opposite to Roddy in a number of ways, such as in personality and upbringing. At some point, we meet Rita's family, who all share the same crowded house, and it's quite obvious from the living conditions and build quality that Rita's family is struggling financially. She even discusses the matter with her dad, who quite clearly doesn't need the money. Compare that to Roddy, who, unlike Rita, has never needed to work for anything in his life. He's done nothing but spend his whole time practically spoiled by his upper class owners, having not only a large house, but also access to a collection of dolls, toys, movies, music, and food. He even owns an electric toothbrush. As a rat. A pet rat. And back to Rita, yes, she may be poor. Yes, she steals for money so she can provide for her family. And yes, her life isn't easy. And that's not even mentioning the dangers she often gets herself in. But here's the thing, unlike Roddy, Rita isn't lonely. She has a loving family and is shown to even somehow know Sid, while Roddy on the other hand tells himself goodnight. And when trouble comes, Rita will often put up a good long fight against any potential threat, while Roddy in the beginning was more willing to run off and cower. I say was because you do slowly watch him improve as the story moves along. And that's what I really like about this scene. It shows us that despite all the chaos and struggle, they still look out for each other, and Roddy realizes this too. You can see the exact moment where he really begins to reflect on his life and how uneventful and lonely it actually is. And by the time the inevitable truth comes out, Rita and Roddy surprisingly don't fall out. Instead, she ends up feeling sorry for him. And the two splitting apart doesn't happen because of some stupid misunderstanding. It was already set to happen anyway, and the only reason Roddy even went back in the first place was to put an end to the Toad's nefarious plot after figuring out the real importance of the Master Cable and World Cup final, allowing him to finally ditch his old life for a more exhilarating one. I love the Toad. He's a very intimidating but also funny villain who, like Roddy, came from an upper class life. At one point, he was owned by a very young Prince Charles, until a rat came in and took his place, setting in his deep obsessive hatred for them. His plan, which is essentially an act of revenge against rat kind, is to open the floodgates during the World Cup final, as everyone else would be too busy watching the game, leaving them completely vulnerable to a plot that will not only flood them out of existence, but also lead to the destruction of their city, thus allowing him to create a home for him and his tadpole children. He must have had a very active sex life to obtain all of those. Either way, the plan cannot go ahead without the Master Cable, a key item that powers the station and allows him to control the floodgates at any time. At some point, however, the Toad grows tired of his minions' repeated failures and calls his French cousin for help. And unlike his minions, LeFroc is actually fairly competent, though much like Whitey and Spike, he's also very funny. A lot of great jokes come straight from him, and overall he and the Toad make a great duo. The clashing personalities and interactions are just so funny to watch, and that's thanks to both the writing and voice talent. Ian McKellen is just perfect as the Toad. You can really tell how much fun he's having while voicing the character. I also love the contrast between him and the frog's personalities throughout the film. The toad is often shown as energetic, authoritative, and obsessive, while his cousin the frog is a lot more laid back and athletic, in addition to his no fucks given attitude, which makes for some really funny moments.
You find my pain funny?
I find everyone's pain funny but my own.
And that is pretty much why I love this movie. A true nostalgia classic, if you will. Flushed Away may not be the greatest DreamWorks film in existence, but it's still a lot of fun to watch. I personally don't have many complaints here, and while I do agree with some of the criticisms against the film, it doesn't really change or affect my opinion on it. I loved it growing up, and I shall hopefully continue that as I get older.
They call me Shocky.
And why do they call you that?